Welcome back. You're watching NewsX. I'm Rishabh Gulati. Yes, over the course of the past 12 hours, we now have an emphatic election mandate that has been delivered to Donald J. Trump to return as the President of the United States of America for the second time. The Americans have chosen what is in their interest and to their wisdom through their democratic means. There is now, of course, room for a global conversation because America is and remains, despite many people wishing otherwise, since before I was born, one of the great powers, if not the only superpower. American decisions have a ripple effect all across the world. They shall continue to do so in the lifetimes of all the people we are going to be discussing this with tonight. But there are some straight questions that need to be asked from us sitting in the world's largest democracy with 4.5 times the number of votes cast in our general elections earlier this year. In a situation where the past 1 month of India's ties with Canada have gone rock bottom in unforeseen territory, with a large assumption of an Indian intelligentsia that no way in heck was Justin Trudeau doing what he's doing without the tacit assent of the Biden administration. Does that change? It's a straight question. Will the Americans drop that support to Trudeau? The second straight question on your screens: is there going to be a fundamental change on Khalistani operations, secessionist operations, trying to create independent states in India who are not headquartered in India but are headquartered in London, in Ottawa, and in parts of the United States? That is as absurd as me proposing a free Quebec sitting in New Delhi or campaigning for a free Northern Ireland sitting in Bombay. But yet it's been happening on American soil. Will that change? It's a straight question. The third straight question, which we have to look to address, and we will in the course of this conversation: will there be a reformation of ties between the US and India? Because in the last 1 month, while Justin Trudeau has been going all guns blazing, what has happened? India's Prime Minister has been attending a meeting of Brazil, Russia, India, China. He's met with Xi Jinping. He's met with Putin. Suddenly, the India-China border issue, of which tens of thousands of troops had been deployed for 4 years, are now withdrawing. That's a fundamental question. It matters. The fourth question on your screens: straightforward, direct, and precise. Will Donald Trump restrict high-skilled migration from India? It's an immigration issue, but will it apply? And that's something that a lot of Indians might not be happy about. The fifth question on your screens: to understand from the Trump administration, will there be tariffs on Indian exports? India runs a positive balance of payments with America. Now, we heard of the Chinese tariffs, but will Donald Trump apply the same to India? He might not, perhaps he will. The sixth question on your screens: to put this into perspective, will Trump boost the stalled technology transfer to India? We've been talking about GE jet engines being made in India for years. It's never happened. It's a reasonable, straightforward, obvious question on where India and the United States go from here. The seventh question on your screens, and I have 3 more after this before we open up this conversation: will Trump shift focus from Ukraine back to Chinese activities in the Indo-Pacific? China, for the first time in its history, is conducting a dual aircraft carrier exercise as we speak. It has harrowed the Philippines, Vietnam, us in India, and in Taiwan, and the Japanese, several of them treaty allies of the United States, but all we are talking about is what's happening in Europe and the Middle East. Will that change? Question number 8 on your screens. Of another point of change: will Trump back India's push for the Israel-Middle East corridor that runs from India, shoots through the Middle East, ends up in the port of Haifa in Israel and into the Mediterranean, to counter the China's BRI project? Will that happen? Yes or no? The ninth question on your screens: will Trump back India in cornering Pakistan at the FATF? Remember, they're off the hook. This is the country that was hosting Guess who? Osama bin Laden. But they are no longer being indicted for terrorism, believe it or not. And the final question on your screens, to put this into perspective from an Indian point of view, will there be Indian Americans in high level cabinet positions in the Trump administration? Because the irony, ladies and gentlemen, is the person who was from Indian heritage, whose name was Kamal, which means lotus, has lost. But yet the vast majority of Indians are telling me today that they are happier that Trump has won for the sake of India-US ties. Let's open up this conversation. Bat Batra is joining us. He is the chairman of a US-India Community Foundation. Dean Baxendale, who's a columnist, is on the broadcast with me, and Ray Locker, who's also a journalist, joining us on the broadcast. Gentlemen, appreciate your time. Mr. Locker, let me begin with you. First, let's absorb the elections in America. What is the message that the American electorate has just sent out?
I think they're unhappy about the economy, unhappy with inflation and the way the Biden-Harris administration handled it, and they're concerned about immigration. And I think those two issues trump the other concerns that people had going into the election.
Is it surprising that this has happened?
Surprising to me, mostly because I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. I think he's the worst president we had in my lifetime, and I'm not optimistic about how he will go going forward without any guardrails. But when you look at people's dissatisfaction with the economy, particularly inflation, and how it came out in exit polls, it's not surprising.
Where do we see light at the end of the tunnel? Because you said guardrails, and reasonable people can argue that a lot of the domestic policies, the entire focus of the administration with people coming in and going out every few weeks and then turning into whistleblowers, even in foreign policy, there was something erratic about it. But there was some consistency from where I'm sitting of the Trump administration on India. Do we expect it to be different? Has he learned something this time around?
I think vis-a-vis India, the policy will be probably the same. I mean, the U.S.-Indian relationship is enduring regardless of who's president. And I think Prime Minister Modi is a master at playing up to Trump. I think he manipulated Trump during his first term as president, and I think he'll continue to do that. You flatter Trump, and he'll follow you around like a puppy dog. And I think that's what happened before, and I think it'll happen again. Today his spokesperson is saying Trump's going to start mass deportations on day one. I think that's a humanitarian crisis in the offing, and you're going to have communities ripped apart, and it'll be visible to everybody, and a lot of people will recoil from that and say, that's not what I meant when I said I didn't want immigration or I wanted things to be changed. I mean, it's one thing to talk about it in a vacuum, but when it happens to somebody you know and you care about, it's totally different. And we're going to see that happen.
Ray Locker, a few hours ago, pretty much every exit poll that was being conducted in America, across party lines, across the aisle, was telling us that 3 out of 4 Americans are afraid, regardless of who they're afraid of the future of American democracy. Now, as we speak, America's democracy has performed and a free election has happened and someone has got elected, this time with also, we suspect, the popular vote. But is America more polarized today than it was 4 years ago and even 8 years ago?
Yes, because people were afraid of Donald Trump. I mean, most people who were saying that about their concerns about democracy. And it's up to him to put people's minds at ease. I don't think he's going to do that. I don't think you're going to see on the part of the Democrats attempts to hold on to power like Trump did 4 years ago, which to me was a disqualifying event that he should be in prison for. But so the Democrats aren't going to try to manipulate, the counting of the votes in the House or anything like that. They'll hand over power and then try their best to rebuild, which is traditionally what they have done. And then it's up to Trump to do things in a way to not alienate more people.
Okay, so I have to ask you this as a writer and as a journalist. What do you now make of an Elon Musk who owns and operates the erstwhile Twitter and Truth Social, because the Republicans tell us that the journalists in America don't like Trump. So all avenues for him to communicate have been blocked, and Truth Social and a Musk ownership of Twitter is a lot different. What do you make of this?
Well, look, journalists tried to work with the Trump administration. I certainly did when I was an editor at USA Today overseeing the White House coverage. We tried our best to get comments from them to find out what they were doing and why. And a lot of times we were given the stiff arm because they didn't want to talk to us, or they didn't have their act together enough to talk to us. And much of the bad news that came out of the Trump administration came from his own people. It wasn't coming from Democrats who went to the White House. It was coming from his own staff who rushed out of a meeting every time something weird happened and told a reporter. So, I mean, Trump was lucky to have the support of Musk and Twitter, or X as it's called now. I don't think it's what it was a few years ago before he bought it, but it was a pro-Trump megaphone where they were tweaking the algorithm to beam pro-Trump messaging, into my stream all the time.
All right, just stay with me.
That helped.
Okay, for people watching this telecast, Dr. Bat Batra is standing by, and it's going to be a treat to listen to him because he's not only a medical doctor, he leads Indian community organizations in the US, and he's one of the people who was telling the Americans that Narendra Modi will become the Prime Minister of India. So it's about time he was given a visa. Dr. Bharat Barai, how are you digesting the mandate from America?
Well, it happened little stronger than what I thought will happen. It's not totally surprising. Last week in New York, I was giving an interview to a TV channel, and there was a lady, excuse me, who is the Democratic president of one of the boroughs in New York. And when we were talking in private, she told me that Trump has edge. So that surprised me from Democratic president of a New York City borough, but she turned out to be right. So I'm digesting it. Obviously, there are concerns that he had some autocratic way of doing the things during his first term. I don't admire the way he tries to dress down people like he has done to many other politicians. I hope that he behaves in a more refined way. He has been seen as a strong leader, and that may be one of the reasons, besides people being dissatisfied with the leadership of Biden and non-existent leadership of Kamala Harris. In fact, when somebody asked me, I said, I wish I had a better choice to vote for, but since I didn't, I had to pick one of the two.
Okay, Dr. Barai, I have to ask you this question because traditionally the Indian American community has voted Democrats for exactly the reasons that Ray Locker has just told us, because we are told the Democratic Party is pro-immigration, is more friendly to first-time people coming to the United States and as they settle in generationally. Yet we are seeing an uptick in those who are not happy with that who are joining actively the Republican Party and campaigning for it and indeed voting for it. What explains this dichotomy, sir?
Well, there are a bunch of reasons. Number one, when the immigrants come, they come with either $8 or $9 in their pocket, as I did 50 years ago. But as we work our way through, we become more affluent and we start thinking about economic things more. You are already an immigrant, you are already a citizen, so that does not apply to you anymore. But in general, it is true that they are more friendly for the immigrants. However, now the Republicans have started realizing that the immigrants from India are highly educated, they are not running in welfare, they are not taking away any of the things that Americans would normally do. So they are complementary to the American way of life, and the industry, whether it is medical industry, whether it is IT industry, whether it is education industry, small businesses working in the areas that many other people would not want to work. So Trump administration had said that they are against illegal immigration, but they are for legal immigration. And Trump had proposed that the quota which is allocated for family immigration, some of it or part of it may be given to professionals, because as you know, many Indian professionals who came on H-1B visa, they have been approved for green card, but because there is a countrywide quota limit of 7,000 per year, there is a backlog which goes back hypothetically to 130 or 140 years.
Okay.
Now, one of the resentment is that Obama administration and subsequently Biden administration, they conduct so-called lottery system because they want to have immigrants from all those other countries that don't normally get the chance. But that way you are accumulating people who don't have skill. Many poor people come, they go on welfare, they are burden on the society. It might have been more better, or it might have been better if this quota was allocated to people who are highly qualified, who are employed, who are providing service to the industry, but have a backlog of 130 years.
Okay, so Dr. Batra, I have to ask you this. You've met Narendra Modi. You were one of the people who lobbied for the fact that that the American administration should end its apartheid against Narendra Modi. So what do you make of the fact that a lot of people in where I am sitting, both people on the street, common people, people who are in intelligentsia, think that a Modi-Trump relationship is much better for the India-US relationship?
The answer is absolutely yes. There is a strong bonhomie between the two, which Trump has expressed several times. In fact, he had called one of the Indian American doctor in Atlanta saying that he was planning to meet Narendra Modi. I'm talking about September of 2024. It did not materialize because of certain reasons, but he has openly said, and when he made out the statement about the Bangladeshi Hindus' atrocities against them, he did mention specifically name of Narendra Modi, that he is a wonderful friend, I know him well. And one thing I can tell you, him using name of Narendra Modi and condemning the Bangladeshi Hindu atrocities and his promise that he will protect the Hindus, just not in United States, Canada, but all over the world, has earned him, I would say, several thousand votes of Indian Americans.
Interesting
now,
thought.
whether that made any difference in the ultimate outcome? Because I think that there are many Jews who have voted for him because of the embargo put on arms or partial embargo put on arms to Israel. So surprisingly, this time even the Pakistani community, which is more pro-Imran Khan community, also openly lent him the support, and many of the Arab Americans. So all these people have contributed to some degree to his victory.
Interesting thoughts. Thank you, Dr. Batra, for joining us and sharing your thoughts. Let me shift the conversation to Dean Baxendale. Dean, let's get your face value. How are you absorbing the results?
Well, I spend a fair amount of time in Washington working with various congressional committees as it relates to human rights and specifically around China. My feeling is that Trump won this resoundingly. It's clear that the American people have given him a mandate. He's won the popular vote by at least 71 million, with about 90% of the vote counted. We can all be concerned about Donald Trump, his proclivities, and he has exhibited, certainly at times, authoritarian tendencies, which scares, every leader of the free world. But also, perhaps he's a person that is the right person at this particular point in time to take on leaders like Xi Jinping and Putin. That will be tested over the next little while to see if he can remain within the guardrails, which are the Constitution, and working with the Congress and the Senate to bring in legislation that does indeed bring down inflation, creates new jobs, reduces the amount of regulations that are needed in the United States, and shrinks the bureaucracy in America. That is what he was voted on, and as James Carville, the famous, Clinton, tactician, said, it's about the economy, stupid, and that's really what drove this. plus this very leftist woke agenda that had been permeating throughout America. Seems to be a backlash to that from, the low propensity voters that were targeted by Trump. But it wasn't just low propensity males that came to the polls. It was all Americans, and they've given him a resounding majority.
Okay, so of course the Americans have voted in Donald Trump primarily to fix the issues that you say that need fixing, not necessarily to sort out Taiwan and Gaza and Iran and all the others, but those also need sorting out. So let me ask you, Dean Baxendale, it's easier said than done. It's easy to say I'll end the war in Ukraine, but Ukrainians have now died. Russians have also died. What formula is going to walk everybody back from that?
Yeah, this is a very volatile and dangerous situation geopolitically. Pulling back from Ukraine and support for that democracy may actually empower Xi Jinping to make his next move, which would be the actual taking of Taiwan. And I think it's very dangerous for Republicans and Donald Trump to suggest that we should just make a deal, end the war, because I think this weakens our position, both short term and long term. So I think hopefully he will listen to key individuals, some of which are from his former administration, some of which I know, who I'm sure will be providing him with insights to really be careful and cautious on how he approaches Ukraine and the support thereof, because I think it has geopolitical ramifications, not only for Taiwan, but also for India long term.
Yes. So, Dean Baxendale, I mean, let's be practical. Our focus has shifted to Eastern Europe because of Ukraine, Russia, to the Middle East because of Lebanon and now Iran, and China has been making hay. They are conducting, as we speak, their first ever dual aircraft carrier exercise in the South China Sea. They've been harrowing the Taiwanese almost on a daily and weekly basis. The Philippines, Vietnam. Would a Trump administration that is telling you that I don't want war in my time be able to at least talk about committing troops or more shipments to Taiwan to defend that country?
Listen, I think this is a policy that's been going on behind the scenes, in terms of supporting Taiwan through American military consultations and also providing, system support for Taiwan. Taiwan is very aware of the situation that's taken place in Ukraine and have adjusted their process internally to try to defend themselves. But the Americans already have 3, air carrier strike groups in the Pacific. I don't think that the policy is going to change. Trump may indeed add another and make it very clear to Xi Jinping that Taiwan is off limits. But I fear Donald Trump's transactional nature. To get a deal done, he may sacrifice Taiwan, and that's dangerous for us all. But right now, I think that the policy that was put in place by the Biden administration will continue on with some definite. Well, we'll see where Trump goes and his advisors take him.
All right, just hold your thought for a second. I have some breaking developments coming here from late this night in New Delhi. We have confirmation now that India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has just had a verbal conversation with Donald Trump, and he has now posted this, and I'm quoting, "Had a great conversation with my friend, congratulating him on his spectacular victory, looking forward to working closely together, looking to further strengthen India-US ties," unquote. Dr. Barai, it's a phone call that has happened, not just a message that has been communicated. Is there a friendly interaction that you mentioned that makes a difference in policy measures?
Absolutely. I think two of them had very good relationship. Remember, he came to Howdy Modi event in Houston, and he was invited by Prime Minister Modi personally at the Paris summit. And at that time, I can tell you, we were discussing with Prime Minister Modi whether the event should occur in Chicago or event should occur in Houston. And it was the preference of President Trump to hold the event in Houston, and that's why it ended up being in Houston rather than Chicago that year. So for a President of the United States to come, accompany him, walk around into the stadium was an exceptional thing that we have seen. Now granted, wherever Prime Minister Modi has gone, he has been accompanied In Israel by Prime Minister Netanyahu. In Britain by the Prime Minister then. The German Chancellor. In Canada, when the previous government was there, Canadian Prime Minister. In Australia by the Australian Prime Minister. So the heads of state have given him that particular respect, whatever you want to call it, and that was given by President Trump.
All right.
Yeah, I think they have a great relationship.
Okay, fair enough. Bharat Barai, Dean Baxendale, Ray Locker, thank you for your perspectives to an audience here halfway across the world, but also qualifies as the world's largest democracy, which has very carefully observed what is happening in what is still the world's only superpower. We take a break. See you in a minute.